Hi, I am Hercule Poirot, and welcome to my new mystery case.
It was on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, beneath the glittering chandeliers of Grey Lawn Manor, that the first whisper of trouble drifted through the drawing room like an errant winter draught. Snow fell in thick, deliberate flakes across the sprawling estate, each flake soft, innocent, and wholly deceptive, much like the gathering within. Grey Lawn, the country home of the esteemed Cavendish family, had always been known for its lavish holiday fete. For decades, it had been a symbol of stability. Ancestral portraits glowering from walnut-paneled walls, servants gliding silently through velvet-draped hallways, and Father Christmas himself greeting guests from the foot of the grand staircase. But this year, something in the air was amiss. Guests moved with a certain stiffness, their smiles just a little too practiced. The lady of the house, Eleanor Cavendish, watched her assembled company with an anxious grace that belied her otherwise impeccable composure. Though barely 50, she carried herself with a regal certainty, as if determined that not even a shadow would dare cross the threshold of her hospitality. "We shall proceed with the gift ceremony at 8 o'clock sharp," she announced to her guests in a voice that rang as crisply as the cut crystal on the sideboard. "It is, after all, Gregory's tradition, and we must honor it." A moment of awkward quiet followed the mention of her late husband, Gregory Cavendish. He had died exactly 1 year ago, on Christmas Eve itself. The cause had been declared a heart attack, though rumors had circulated with unsettling tenacity. A dispute over a business venture, a mysterious absence in the will, an argument overheard by a servant. None of it had ever found firm footing, but the whispers had never truly died. The guests shifted uneasily, casting fleeting glances toward the far end of the drawing room, where a mahogany cabinet, locked, stood prominently beneath a spray of poinsettias. It contained, as Eleanor often said, with near-ceremonial reverence, Gregory's final Christmas gifts to the family, purchased before his sudden death. No one had yet opened them. At the center of the room, standing apart yet entirely self-possessed, was Lydia Harrow, Gregory's young niece and heiress to a modest portion of his estate. Tall, striking, and undeniably clever, Lydia had an air of restless energy about her, as if she could sense a storm forming on the horizon. Bishop Carmichael, retired but no less authoritative in his bearing, stood beside her, stroking his silver beard with a practiced solemnity. Then there was Charles Ventham, Gregory's former business partner, a man whose genial exterior barely concealed a temperament prone to sudden flashes of resentment. His wife, the elegant yet brittle Constance Ventham, lingered near him with a watchful eye, as though guarding both him and herself. The final guest, at least among the principal company, was Miss Felicity Boyd, Eleanor's lifelong friend and a woman of formidable social instincts. She alone seemed oblivious to the tension in the room, chattering on about holiday decorations and the scarcity of good mistletoe that season. At precisely 4 o'clock, the manor doors burst open with a hush of snow swept inside, and the butler, Mr. Avery, announced, "Inspector Hale, of the County Constabulary." A mild shock rippled through the assembled guests. Inspector Edmund Hale, a tall man with the habitual frown of someone accustomed to disappointment, stepped forward and bowed apologetically to Eleanor. "I beg your pardon for the intrusion, Lady Cavendish. A matter of urgency compels me." His gaze traveled across the room, alighting briefly on each face. Eleanor paled almost imperceptibly. "What matter, Inspector?" Hale withdrew a small leather notebook. "I've come regarding the disappearance of Miss Lydia Harrow's ruby pendant." All eyes pivoted to Lydia. She touched her bare collarbone, her expression frozen in a curious blend of irritation and disbelief. "It was on my dressing table," she said evenly. "I saw it this morning." The inspector nodded. "And now it is gone. A theft, perhaps." "But there is another concern." He hesitated. "What concern?" Eleanor pressed. Hale cleared his throat. A note was found in Miss Harrow's room. It states quite plainly, 1 year gone, one truth buried. Tonight, it is dug up. A silence so profound it was almost tangible fell upon the room. Constance Ventham gasped softly. Charles's jaw tightened. Felicity's incessant chatter died at once, and the bishop murmured something under his breath. "It must be someone's ghastly joke," Lydia said, but there was a tremor in her voice that contradicted the confidence of her words. Inspector Hale shook his head. "Given the anniversary of Mr. Cavendish's death, the constabulary cannot treat it as a jest." The snow outside continued to fall with merciless calm, burying the gardens and muffling the world beyond Greylawn's walls. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parquet floor, like dark fingers stretching toward the locked cabinet. Eleanor steadied herself against the back of a chair. "Inspector, what are you saying?" "I'm saying, Lady Cavendish," Hale replied gravely, "that this may not be a simple case of theft. It may be that someone in this house knows something about your husband's passing, something they intend to expose tonight." The words had scarcely left his mouth when a sudden crash echoed from the corridor. Guests rushed toward the sound, only to find Mr. Avery, the butler, standing rigidly before a toppled side table. But it was not the overturned furniture that seized the breath of every witness. It was the crimson stain spreading across the white linen runner leading toward the east wing. Inspector Hale knelt beside it, touched the stain, and looked up with grim certainty. Fresh blood. Eleanor swayed and Lydia caught her arm. What does this mean?" Constance whispered, voice trembling. Inspector Hale rose, his expression darkening further. "It means, ladies and gentlemen, the night has only just begun." The guests clustered in uneasy silence as Inspector Hale signaled for calm, his voice low but firm as he directed everyone back into the drawing room. The crimson stain in the corridor, though small, possessed a dreadful clarity that none could dismiss as an accident. Snow continued to fall beyond the tall windows, sealing the house in a world of white while tension tightened around every occupant like a tightening noose. Lydia Harrow stood closest to the inspector. Her earlier poise had waned, replaced by an alert, almost defensive rigidity. Eleanor Cavendish, still pale from the shock, allowed Felicity Boyd to guide her toward a settee where she seated herself with trembling dignity. Charles Ventham paced near the hearth, muttering about unfortunate timing, while his wife Constance watched the stairway as though expecting a phantom to descend. Inspector Hale's words broke the silence. "No one is to leave the manor, not until we determine who was injured, and why." His gaze passed over their faces. "Given the note found in Miss Harrow's room, it is entirely possible that tonight's events are connected to the death of Mr. Gregory Cavendish." A low murmur rose, swiftly suppressed when the inspector raised a hand. "I will speak with each of you shortly, but first I must determine whether the blood suggests immediate danger. Mr. Avery," he called to the butler, "fetch a lantern. We shall examine the east wing." Avery, though visibly shaken, nodded and quickly departed. The moment he disappeared from sight, Charles Ventham broke his silence. "Surely this is being blown out of proportion. A bit of misplaced jewelry and now a bloodstain. There must be a rational explanation." Lydia turned sharply. "A rational explanation, Mr. Ventham, would not involve cryptic threats left in a bedroom." Charles stiffened. "I did not imply you were involved." "You implied something," Lydia retorted. "You always do." Before their exchange could escalate, Bishop Carmichael stepped between them with gentle authority. "This is a night for restraint. Grief and suspicion are dangerous companions." Inspector Hale returned then, lantern in hand, Avery following behind. "Remain here," he instructed the group. "No one moves from this room." He hesitated a beat, then added, "If anyone here knows something that may prevent further harm, now is the time to speak." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears. Receiving no response, Hale nodded curtly and disappeared down the corridor alongside Avery. The guests waited, breath held collectively, listening for any distant sound. The lantern's glow flickered faintly along the far wall, vanishing as the pair rounded a corner. Moments stretched, their passage marked only by the ticking of the mantel clock. Constance finally broke the stillness in a soft whisper. "I cannot bear this suspense. What if someone is—" A sudden shout echoed from the east wing. Lydia rose instantly, her eyes wide. Eleanor clutched Felicity's hand. The inspector's voice followed, calling for assistance. Despite his earlier order, Charles was the first to rush forward, the others trailing behind, despite their fear. The corridor felt colder now, as though the very air recoiled from what lay ahead. They found Inspector Hale kneeling beside a heavy oak door that stood half open. Avery stood stiffly nearby, his face drained of color. On the floor just inside the room lay a smear of blood, leading to an overturned chair. But the room's occupant, if there had been one, was nowhere in sight. Hale examined the floor carefully, then straightened. "Fresh indeed," he murmured. "This occurred within the last quarter hour." He looked to Avery. "Who occupies this room?" Avery swallowed hard. "It belongs to Mr. Lionel Pierce, sir. He arrived 2 nights ago, a distant cousin of Lady Cavendish." A new ripple of surprise passed through the guests. Lionel Pierce had scarcely been noticed the entire evening. A quiet, studious young man who preferred the library to the drawing room. That he might be involved in such disturbance was difficult to imagine. Eleanor stepped forward, steadier now. "Inspector, Lionel is a gentle soul. He would never harm anyone." "Perhaps not," Hale replied. "But he may be the one harmed." He studied the blood once more. "We must locate him immediately." Lydia approached the threshold, her expression sharpening. "There is something else," she said quietly. "Lionel spoke with me earlier. He asked when the cabinet would be open tonight. He said he felt it was significant." Eleanor turned sharply. "Significant? In what way?" Lydia shook her head. He would not say. The inspector considered this, his brow furrowing. Whatever its meaning, it appears someone wished to prevent him from speaking further. He gestured toward the stairway. "We search the manor from top to bottom, quietly, thoroughly. If Lionel is injured, time is essential." As the party dispersed into smaller groups under Hale's direction, the oppressive weight of the house settled over them. Shadows lengthened, hallways narrowed, and every creak of the old estate seemed to whisper of secrets long buried. And though none voiced it aloud, all carried the same unspoken fear. Tonight's troubles were only beginning. In the dim hush of Grey Lawn's corridors, each step carried the hope that Lionel would emerge unharmed. Yet beneath that hope pulsed a deeper dread. For however unsettling the night had become, a question pressed itself upon every searching mind. If Lionel had been silenced, what truth had he uncovered, and who among them feared its revelation? Tonight. Inspector Hale directed the search with brisk efficiency, dividing the guests and servants into pairs under his supervision. The East Wing, with its dim-lit passages and seldom-used guest rooms, seemed to constrict around them as they moved deeper into its quiet shadows. The faint scent of pine from the decorated garlands did little to mask the tension permeating the air. A missing man, a trail of blood, and a cryptic threat found in Lydia's room, all had converged into a single, unnerving mystery. Lydia herself walked beside the inspector, her steps quick but precise. She held a lantern Avery had provided, its soft glow revealing the stern determination etched into her face. Charles and Constance followed at a slight distance, though Constance frequently glanced behind them as though fearing unseen eyes. Eleanor and Felicity had been sent back to the drawing room, accompanied by Bishop Carmichael, who insisted on staying at her side. They obeyed reluctantly, but understood Hale's reasoning. Fewer people in the corridors meant fewer distractions in what could become a dangerous pursuit. The group reached a narrow turning leading toward the older part of the manor. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and a draught slipped through the cracks, whispering faintly along the walls. Lydia lifted her lantern higher. "Lionel often came this way," she murmured. "He said the quiet helped him think." Charles gave a short, derisive huff. "A strange fellow, that one, always scribbling notes and lurking about." "Observing is not lurking," Lydia countered sharply. "Some minds prefer to watch." "Oh, spare us your philosophical musings," Constance muttered, though without her usual conviction. Inspector Hale halted suddenly. "Quiet." The corridor fell still. At first, Lydia heard nothing beyond her own heartbeat. Then, faintly, from the end of the passageway came a sound, soft, uneven, like a hesitant footstep or the dragging of fabric across wood. Hale raised a hand for silence and approached cautiously, pushing open a door that had been left slightly ajar. The lantern light spilled into the room, revealing what appeared to be a small study. Shelves lined the walls, holding aged books and bric-a-brac. A writing desk sat near the window, and on it lay scattered papers, as though someone had left in haste. But what caught Hale's attention was the half-drawn curtain at the window. A smear of red stained the fabric where a hand had gripped it. "Blood," Hale murmured. "More of it." Constance let out a small gasp. Charles swore under his breath. Lydia stepped forward. "Inspector, look." On the desk, half covered by a leather-bound volume, lay a torn scrap of paper. Hale lifted it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, as if written in haste or distress. "I know what he hid. It was never meant to be found. The cabinet, tonight. Everything ends." The inspector's jaw tightened. This handwriting, did Lionel write like this? "Not ordinarily," Lydia replied. "His hand was steady. This looks frantic." Avery, who had just entered behind them, looked deeply troubled. "Sir, if Mr. Pierce discovered something he should not have, then whoever wished it kept secret may have moved against him." Hale nodded grimly. "And if Lionel was trying to warn someone, perhaps Miss Harrow, he may have been stopped before he could." Charles stepped back. "Then we are dealing with someone who is willing to hurt others to protect a secret. How charming company we keep this Christmas." Lydia ignored the remark and examined the desk. "Lionel borrowed books from these shelves earlier," she said. "He mentioned researching Gregory's business dealings. He thought something did not add up." The inspector raised a brow. "Did he say what troubled him?" "No," Lydia said. "But he asked about Gregory's partners. And strangely, he asked whether Gregory kept personal records outside of the office." Charles stiffened. "What exactly are you implying, Miss Harrow?" "I'm stating facts, nothing more," Lydia replied. "Lionel found something that alarmed him." Hale stepped between them. "Speculation will not help Lionel now. We must continue searching." He paused. "Avery, secure this room. No one is to enter or tamper with anything. Understood?" "Yes, sir." They resumed their search, moving deeper into the manor where the ceilings lowered and the corridors narrowed. The house grew older here, original to the estate before successive generations had added their grander extensions. A sense of quiet desolation hung about the place, as though memories lay dormant in every shadow. As they passed a door at the far end, a faint metallic clang sounded from within. Hale froze. Lydia felt Charles tense beside her. The inspector pressed his ear to the wood. "Someone is inside." Without waiting for further discussion, he turned the handle. The door groaned open. The lantern illuminated a storage room filled with trunks, discarded furnishings, and a tall iron coat rack leaning at an angle. And there, slumped against the far wall, barely conscious, was Lionel Pierce. Lydia gasped and ran to him, kneeling at his side. Lionel's face was pale, his breathing shallow. Blood stained his left sleeve and had trickled to the floor, though the wound did not appear immediately fatal. "Lionel," she whispered urgently, "can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. His gaze drifted to Lydia, unfocused but filled with unmistakable recognition. "You must tell him." His voice was hoarse, each word strained. "It wasn't a heart attack. Gregory, he—" Hale leaned closer. "What about Mr. Cavendish?" Lionel's breath caught. His hand trembled as he gestured weakly toward the doorway. He knew. Someone would come for the letters. "What letters?" Lydia pressed. But Lionel's strength faltered. His head drifted sideways, consciousness slipping from him like water through parted fingers. Hale lifted him gently. "We must get him to a physician. He is alive, but weakened." Charles hovered near the doorway, visibly rattled. "He spoke of letters." "What letters?" "Eleanor said Gregory left nothing behind." "Perhaps Eleanor believed that," Hale said quietly. "Or perhaps she was told to believe it." Lydia's lantern flickered, its glow wavering across Lionel's pale features. A sense of gravity settled upon them all, an understanding that whatever Lionel had uncovered, it had been dangerous enough to provoke violence, and more disturbingly, it was connected directly to Gregory Cavendish's mysterious death 1 year ago. The inspector called for Avery to fetch help, and as they prepared to move Lionel from the shadows of that forgotten room, Lydia felt an icy shiver run through her. For the first time that evening, she realized that someone within Grey Lawn was terrified of the truth emerging, and worse still, they were willing to spill blood to ensure it stayed buried beneath the snow-covered quiet of Christmas Eve. Avery hurried off to summon assistance, and Inspector Hale lifted Lionel with measured care, supporting the young man's weakened frame as Lydia held the lantern to guide them back through the narrowing corridors. Lionel drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring incoherent fragments that dissolved into shallow breaths before any meaning could be drawn from them. Every flicker of his eyes seemed to plead for urgency. The group walked with quiet haste, their steps echoing faintly through the east wing as though the manor itself listened with bated breath. When they reached the broader hall, Felicity Boyd appeared at once, clearly having ignored instructions to remain in the drawing room. Her expression trembled between alarm and indignation. "Good heavens, what has happened?" "Oh, the poor boy. Eleanor, come quickly." She darted back toward the drawing room, her voice ringing ahead of her like a warning bell. Moments later, Eleanor emerged with Bishop Carmichael supporting her arm. At the sight of Lionel, her composure faltered despite her resolve. "Bring him to the settee," she instructed, stepping aside to clear a path. "Someone fetch blankets and hot water." Constance moved quickly to obey, while Charles hovered nearby with a stiffness that betrayed more anxiety than concern. Inspector Hale settled Lionel gently onto the settee. The young man groaned faintly as Lydia knelt beside him again, her voice steady but soft as she tried to coax another word from him. He responded only with a slight, pained movement of his head. Eleanor watched with deepening apprehension. "Inspector, was this an attack? Lionel has no quarrel with anyone." Hale met her gaze. "He has a wound, Lady Cavendish," and he spoke words before losing consciousness. Words suggesting Gregory's death may not have been from natural causes. A hush fell at his statement. Even Felicity, who usually filled silence with chatter, seemed struck dumb. Eleanor's face drained of color, though she caught herself and straightened. "That is impossible." The doctors were clear. Gregory suffered from stress for years. And yet, Lydia interjected, eyes on Lionel. "He insisted that Gregory knew someone would come for letters." Charles stepped forward abruptly. "Letters? What letters? Why would he say such a thing now?" "That," Inspector Hale replied, "is what I intend to discover." Constance returned with blankets and covered Lionel's trembling form. His breathing steadied slightly, though his eyelids remained shut. Hale motioned Avery closer. Send one of the servants to telephone Dr. Harbridge. Tell him it is urgent." Avery bowed and disappeared once more. As the room settled into tense quiet, Hale turned to the guests. "I must ask you all something rather delicate. Has anyone here seen or heard anything unusual today besides what has already been mentioned? Any movement near the east wing? Anything at all?" The responses came slowly. Constance shook her head. Felicity said she had barely ventured beyond the drawing room. Bishop Carmichael murmured that he had been with Eleanor for most of the afternoon. Charles hesitated only a moment. "No, I saw nothing." Hale studied him for a breath longer than courtesy required, then looked toward Lydia. "Miss Harrow?" Lydia inhaled, steady but thoughtful. Only that Lionel was agitated earlier. He avoided conversation unless pressed. He kept glancing at the cabinet. Eleanor stiffened again. "That cabinet contains nothing but Gregory's last gifts. They are sentimental, nothing more." "Sentiment can conceal much," Hale said quietly. "We will address its contents later. For now, I must determine who confronted Lionel, and why." Charles crossed his arms with a scoff. "You seem quite convinced someone here endangered him." "Perhaps he simply had a fall." "Falls rarely write frantic notes," Lydia said sharply, "or leave trails of blood." Before Charles could retort, a faint knock sounded from the direction of the main door. Avery reappeared. "Inspector, it is Dr. Harbridge. He came immediately." The arrival of the physician introduced a wave of hushed activity. Dr. Harbridge bent over Lionel, inspecting the wound beneath his torn sleeve. He worked methodically, his brow furrowed, his hands steady. After some minutes, he looked up at Hale. "He has suffered a blow, likely from a blunt object. Not a deep wound, but enough to shock the system. He must rest. I will treat him here, but he must not be moved further." "Will he wake soon?" Lydia asked. The doctor hesitated. "Perhaps. It depends on his strength." Hale nodded. "Very well. Stay with him. Let me know the moment he can speak." As the doctor set about his work, the inspector stepped aside, signaling Lydia to follow him to a quieter corner of the room. "I need clarity," he murmured. "You spoke with Lionel more than anyone. Did he confide anything at all about what he suspected?" Lydia folded her arms, her eyes drifting to Lionel's still form. Only that Gregory's business accounts had inconsistencies. He believed someone had altered or hidden financial records. When I asked whether he had evidence, he said he was close to something, and that the cabinet mattered. Did he say whether this pertained to anyone in this room? No, but his tone suggested a personal betrayal. Hale absorbed this with stern concentration. Then Lionel uncovered something directly tied to Gregory's past, whether business or personal. Someone feared exposure and acted. They turned as Eleanor approached, her expression torn between worry and resolve. "Inspector, if there is anything I can answer, anything that helps you understand what happened to my husband, ask." Hale regarded her carefully. "Very well. Did Gregory ever mention letters or documents he wished hidden?" Eleanor's eyes widened, then softened with recollection. There was a locked drawer in his study, destroyed by fire years ago when a candle overturned. Gregory said it held only old correspondence with clients. He never rebuilt it. "Did he remove anything before the fire?" She hesitated. He said no. "And did you believe him?" Hale asked gently. A long silence followed before she whispered, "I wanted to." Before Hale could press further, a sharp cry from the settee interrupted them. Lionel stirred violently, gasping as though waking from a nightmare. Lydia rushed to his side. The doctor steadied him, urging calm. Lionel's eyes darted wildly before fixing on Lydia. "The letters," he croaked. "Hidden, not burned." He lied. His gaze shifted desperately toward the cabinet. "It's in there. The truth. He left it for tonight." His voice broke. The doctor eased him back as the room absorbed his revelation with collective dread. And though no one yet understood what waited inside that locked cabinet, they all knew one thing. Whatever Gregory Cavendish had concealed was meant to surface only tonight, and someone in Greylorn would do anything to stop it. For a long heartbeat, no one moved after Lionel's halting declaration. The words hung in the room like drifting embers, casting a strange, shimmering tension over every face. The locked cabinet, once merely an heirloom meant to complete a sentimental holiday tradition, had transformed before their eyes into something ominous, an object holding secrets that Gregory Cavendish had never intended to share prematurely. Inspector Hale stepped closer to Lionel, studying the young man's fading strength, then shifted his attention toward the cabinet with new, calculating intent. Eleanor followed his gaze, her features caught between disbelief and a dawning sense of dread. "You cannot mean to imply Gregory left evidence of something improper." Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to steady it. "He was an honorable man, Inspector. Whatever he kept in that cabinet was meant for us as tokens on Christmas Eve. That was always his way." "Intentions change when a man fears betrayal," Hale replied quietly. "And your husband, it seems, anticipated a reckoning of some sort." He turned to Avery. "Bring me the key to the cabinet, if you please." Avery hesitated. Constance watched him narrowly, and Charles's jaw tensed. Lydia rose from Lionel's side, sensing a shift in the room's energy, but Avery shook his head with a pained expression. "I cannot, sir. Lady Cavendish instructed me never to handle the cabinet key. She keeps it in her possession." All eyes turned toward Eleanor, who blinked as though startled. She reached instinctively for the small chain tucked beneath her bodice. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she withdrew a delicate silver key. The moment the metal glinted in the lantern light, Lydia noted a flicker of resentment cross Charles Bentham's features, gone as quickly as it appeared, but unsettling nonetheless. Inspector Hale extended his hand. "Lady Cavendish." Eleanor hesitated, fingers tightening around the key. If Gregory left something distressing, something meant for tonight alone, I fear what it may reveal, but I will not obstruct the truth. She placed the key into Hale's waiting palm as though surrendering a part of herself. Hale nodded. "Thank you." But before he approached the cabinet, his attention shifted back to Lionel, whose breathing had steadied under the doctor's care. The inspector knelt briefly. "Mr. Pierce, did Gregory tell you this himself?" Lionel's eyes fluttered open for a scant moment, his voice barely audible. "Not him. Someone." "Who knew?" His gaze drifted toward the Benthams before exhaustion dragged him back into silence. Lydia felt a chill settle deep within her. Charles bristled and looked away sharply. "If you intend to accuse us based on the ramblings of an injured man, no one is accusing anyone," Hale replied evenly, though the edge in his tone silenced further protest. "But we must follow every lead." He rose and approached the cabinet with measured steps. Eleanor, Felicity, Lydia, and the others formed a loose circle behind him, each face reflecting a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The key slid into the lock with a soft metallic click. For an instant, the entire room held its breath. Hale turned the key slowly, the mechanism yielding with a reluctant groan. When he opened the cabinet doors, a faint scent of cedar and old paper drifted forth. Inside lay a series of neatly wrapped boxes, 11 of them, each adorned with Gregory's familiar, elegant handwriting. But beneath the boxes, set apart and partially hidden beneath a false wooden panel, was a small leather folio bound with a worn ribbon. Eleanor gasped softly. "I have never seen that before." Hale removed the folio carefully and placed the boxed gifts aside. "This appears to be what Lionel mentioned." He untied the ribbon, revealing a collection of letters. Some dated months before Gregory's death, others years earlier. The topmost bore a single name, Charles Ventham. Lydia saw Charles stiffen as though struck. Hale unfolded the first letter and skimmed its contents. His brows narrowed. Lady Cavendish, were you aware your husband had concerns about Mr. Ventham's financial dealings? Eleanor covered her mouth in shock. No, Gregory trusted Charles implicitly. Constance stepped forward defensively. This is outrageous. You cannot rely on private letters, written who knows under what circumstances, to tarnish a man's reputation. Hale continued calmly. These letters reference discrepancies in company accounts. Gregory accuses Mr. Ventham of withholding profits and forging signatures. He writes that he intended to confront him after Christmas Eve last year. His gaze fixed on Charles. That confrontation never occurred. Charles's face had gone ashen, his expression wavering between anger and fear. Gregory misunderstood, mistook routine transactions for impropriety. He would have listened if he had confronted me. Lydia stepped closer, eyes sharp. Is that why he died before he could? Constance let out a strangled sound. How dare you suggest? But Hale raised a hand. Enough. At present, we know only that Gregory suspected betrayal. Whether justified or not, he intended to act on those suspicions, and Mr. Pierce seems to have discovered the existence of these letters, prompting someone to silence him. A cold silence descended. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes like restless fingers. Then Lionel stirred again, whispering hoarsely. Not just Charles. Others. Danger. But his voice faded before he could speak more. Hale closed the folio with careful deliberation. This is only the beginning. Gregory feared someone close to him, possibly more than one person. Eleanor trembled. Inspector, what are you saying? That the truth Gregory concealed in this cabinet may reveal not only motives, Hale said, but the identity of whoever harmed Lionel and whoever wished Gregory's death to remain a closed chapter. Inspector Hale held the folio a moment longer, his thumb resting against the weathered leather, as though measuring the weight of the secrets it contained. The room remained suspended in a tense quiet, each person absorbing the implications of Gregory's letters, and the possibility that someone among them had feared exposure enough to spill blood. Lydia watched Charles with a steady, discerning gaze. He avoided her eyes, his shoulders rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscles quiver beneath the skin. Constance stood close at his side, but even she seemed unsettled, her hands clasped tightly together as though holding herself intact. Lionel stirred again, though the doctor urged him not to exert himself. His lips parted, but whatever word he attempted dissolved into a faint, broken whisper. Lydia touched his hand gently. Rest. We will understand what you tried to tell us. His fingers tightened momentarily around hers before slackening into stillness again. Inspector Hale returned the folio to the cabinet for the moment, locking the doors but keeping the key in his possession. We must proceed carefully, he said. This house contains more shadows than we first believed, and until I understand how far Gregory's suspicions extended, I cannot assume the danger has passed. Eleanor sat heavily in an armchair, grief layered with confusion upon her features. If Gregory mistrusted Charles, or anyone, why did he say nothing? Why leave letters instead of speaking to me? Hale responded gently but firmly. Perhaps he feared implicating someone close to him without certainty, or perhaps he meant to confront matters tonight after his traditional gift ceremony. His intentions, whatever they were, remained unfinished. Charles turned abruptly. Inspector, if you intend to parade me as the villain of this drama, you are mistaken. Yes, Gregory questioned a handful of figures in the company. He was under tremendous strain. There were misunderstandings, but for you to suggest I had any role in his death is nothing short of insulting. Your defensiveness does you no favors, Lydia remarked. We are searching for truth, not casting roles. Constance bristled. And you, Miss Harrow, seem inordinately eager to believe the worst. Lydia held her gaze without flinching. I believe what evidence suggests, and clearly, someone in this house feared Lionel discovering more. Hale intervened before tension could flare further. Let us not forget that Gregory hinted at multiple concerns. Until we examine the letters thoroughly, no one is absolved. He glanced at Eleanor. Lady Cavendish, I will need your permission to review them privately. Eleanor nodded faintly. Do whatever is necessary. Just then, Avery re-entered quietly. Inspector, the servants have checked all doors and windows. Everything is secured from within. No intruders entered or left the manor. Meaning, Hale said, Lionel's assailant is among us. A shiver passed through the room. Even the fire crackled with an uneasy rhythm, as if reluctant to intrude on the moment. Bishop Carmichael stepped forward, his expression somber. May I suggest, Inspector, that we gather everyone in one location? It would be safer. Ordinarily, yes, Hale replied. But for now, I want freedom to observe behavior without the pressure of constant company. I intend to speak with each of you privately. Felicity, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until now, cleared her throat. Inspector, Lionel was found near the old storage room. Forgive me, but why would anyone take him there? It is not an obvious place to attack someone. Unless, Lydia said, it is where the culprit was searching for something. Lionel may have stumbled upon them. Hale nodded. Possible. Or the assailant wished to hide his body temporarily. The blow was forceful. They may have believed him dead. Eleanor inhaled sharply. But why harm him at all? If Gregory kept letters accusing Charles or anyone, what threat was Lionel? Knowledge, Hale answered. Knowledge is often sufficient reason. Constance pressed a trembling hand to her cheek. This is grotesque, on Christmas Eve of all nights. The inspector's voice softened, but did not waver. Truth seldom chooses its moments, Mrs. Ventham. He turned again toward the cabinet, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Gregory prepared gifts for each of you before his death, yet he concealed these letters beneath them, almost as though he wanted to mask their existence until tonight. He must have anticipated something significant would occur, something tied to this gathering. Lydia felt a chill spread along her spine. The note in my room, 1 year gone, one truth buried. Tonight it is dug up. Someone knew the truth was meant to surface tonight, or feared it would, Hale said. Which means we may expect more interference before the night is over. At that moment, Lionel let out a sudden gasp. His eyes opened wide, full of terror. He tried to rise, struggling against the doctor's restraining hands. He's here, Lionel rasped. He was watching, listening. He said the letters belonged to him. Who, Lionel? Lydia asked urgently. Who said that? Lionel's gaze scanned the room wildly before fixing on a distant corner near the staircase. He was there. I saw him earlier. Gregory warned me. But his breath failed him before he could say more. He slumped back, unconscious again. Inspector Hale rose immediately, striding toward the area Lionel had indicated. The shadows near the staircase lay still, the only movement the shifting dance of firelight. No lurking figure, no sign of disturbance. But Hale did not dismiss Lionel's fear. He studied the dark corner with narrowed eyes, as though committing it to memory. When he returned, he spoke in a calm, controlled voice that heightened the room's unease. Whoever Lionel meant is still among us, and close enough to overhear conversations. His gaze swept over the assembled guests. No one leaves this room without my permission. The wind lashed the windows with sudden force, as though echoing his command. And beneath its howl lay an unspoken certainty shared by every person present. The danger within Greylon was growing, its source unseen, its intentions tightening like a noose with every passing hour. Inspector Hale's command settled over the room like a tightening net. No one protested, though several exchanged tense, uneasy glances. The fire crackled steadily, but its warmth felt somehow distant, unable to dispel the cold that had crept into Greylawn. Lydia remained at Lionel's side, watching his pale, motionless form while the doctor monitored his breathing with steady vigilance. Every so often, Lionel's fingers twitched as if he were fighting some unseen force in his weary mind. Hale paced slowly before the hearth, his gaze sweeping across the guests with deliberate scrutiny. Lionel believes someone here was watching him earlier, someone who believes the letters belong to him. That suggests a personal stake, something Gregory took or hid or intended to expose. Charles emitted a strained laugh, though it lacked all humor. You cannot possibly take the fevered mutterings of an injured man as fact. He is delirious. He was lucid when he mentioned the letters, Lydia replied evenly. And he repeated the warning twice, before and after he collapsed. Constance folded her arms tightly, her composure beginning to fracture. Everyone seems far too ready to see guilt in every shadow. If Gregory hid letters, surely he meant only to settle old business matters. Nothing sinister. Then why conceal them beneath a false panel? Hale asked. Why lock them away without telling anyone, not even his wife? Eleanor winced, though she held her chin high. I trusted Gregory completely. If he kept something from me, he must have had his reasons. Lydia gently covered Eleanor's hand. No one doubts that, but keeping secrets rarely protects the people one hopes to shield. The older woman managed a faint nod, though her eyes shone with distress. A sudden gust rattled the window so forcefully that Felicity startled and released a small cry. Outside, snow hurled itself against the panes, the storm worsening by the minute. Greylawn stood sealed in its own world. No escape, no intruder, only the possibility that the danger Lionel feared stood among them. Inspector Hale resumed pacing, his mind clearly working with quiet intensity. We proceed step by step. Mr. Ventham, since Gregory's letters mention you by name, we begin with you. Where were you during the half-hour before Lionel was found? Charles stiffened. I was with my wife in our guest room. Constance nodded quickly. Yes, we were preparing for the evening. I can confirm that. Lydia watched them. Something about Constance's agreement felt too swift, too polished, as though she had rehearsed it silently the moment Hale began his questioning, but she said nothing yet. The inspector's expression offered no clue to his thoughts as he continued. And before that, Hale asked. Charles hesitated, then cleared his throat. I took a short walk through the manor to stretch my legs. The corridors were quiet. I saw no one. Which corridor? Hale asked. The east wing? Charles shook his head. The west. I had no reason to go near the east wing. Lydia exchanged a look with Felicity, who looked unconvinced despite her usual eagerness to believe a pleasant lie. And you, Mrs. Ventham? Hale's eyes turned to Constance. I was in our room, Constance replied immediately. I hardly left it all afternoon. You did leave once, Lydia said quietly. Near 4 o'clock. I saw you walking toward the central hall. Constance blinked rapidly, caught off guard. Yes, briefly. I went to find Charles. I'd forgotten that. Hale's expression hardened just slightly. The central hall leads to both the west and east wings. Why did you choose that direction? Constance's lips parted, then closed again. She looked to Charles, who frowned as though silently urging her to hold firm. I simply walked without thinking. Surely every movement in this house does not require justification. Under ordinary circumstances, no, Hale replied. Tonight, yes. Before Constance could respond, the doctor spoke softly from the settee. Inspector, Lionel is waking again. At once the room leaned forward with collective anticipation. Lydia knelt as Lionel's eyelids fluttered, his gaze clouded but searching. Hale crouched beside him. Lionel, listen carefully. You said someone told you the letters belonged to him. Who was it? Who did you see? Lionel swallowed, his throat working painfully. For a moment, Lydia feared he would slip away again, but then he lifted a trembling hand. Not toward Charles or Constance, but toward the staircase, though not the shadowed corner from before. His finger pointed slightly upward, toward the landing where the corridor to Gregory's former study began. "He was there," Lionel whispered. "The study." Gregory said, "He said I must look there if anything happened to him." Eleanor gasped. "Gregory's study has been locked since his death. I could not bear to open it." Charles stepped forward. "Eleanor, surely you don't believe—" But Hale had already risen to his feet. "Lady Cavendish, I will need the key to that room as well." Eleanor hesitated longer this time, clinging to the arms of her chair as though the memories tied to that study might collapse upon her. "Inspector, must we? That room contains everything of Gregory's, untouched just as he left it." "It may also contain the truth he feared would be buried," Hale said gently. "And if Lionel dragged himself toward the old wing searching for answers, we must assume those answers began in the study." The fire flickered, casting elongated shadows across the walls, shadows that swayed like silent witnesses. Slowly, Eleanor reached into a drawer beside her chair and retrieved a second key, this one brass and more ornate. Her hand trembled as she passed it to Hale. "Be careful," she whispered. "Whatever Gregory left behind, he meant to protect us from it." Hale closed his fingers around the key with quiet resolve. "And I mean to protect you now." But as he turned toward the staircase, Lydia felt a strange prickle along her spine, an instinctive awareness that someone else in the room had reacted sharply, even fearfully, to the mention of the study. She scanned the faces carefully. Charles's expression was unreadable. Constance stood rigid as marble. Felicity watched with wide, fearful eyes. Eleanor's gaze followed the key as though it were a fragment of her husband's spirit. Bishop Carmichael bowed his head in prayer, yet Lydia could not shake the sensation that one of them was on the brink of panic. And if Gregory's study truly held the secret he died protecting, then the person who feared its discovery might act again, before the inspector reached the door. Inspector Hale moved toward the staircase with deliberate steps, the brass key glinting faintly in the lantern light. The room behind him remained thick with apprehension, as though the very walls sensed the gravity of the moment. Lydia rose slowly from Lionel's side, torn between staying to watch over him and following the inspector into whatever revelation awaited in Gregory's sealed study. Something in her intuition, sharp, insistent, urged her not to let Hale go alone. Eleanor lifted her gaze as Hale approached the stairs. "Inspector, whatever you find in that room, I beg you tell me first, before anyone else." Her request was quiet, not commanding, but pleading. Hale paused, then inclined his head. "You have my word." He resumed his ascent. Lydia followed a few steps behind him. "I'm coming with you," she said softly. Hale did not object. "Very well, but stay close. If Lionel is correct, someone may try to interfere before we reach the room." Lydia felt the truth of this immediately. The air on the landing was colder, sharper, as though the storm outside seeped through the walls. The corridor leading to Gregory's study stretched ahead, silent, unwelcoming, half swallowed in shadow. The lantern Hale carried cast elongated shapes onto the floor, and with each step the house seemed to protest with faint groans in the timber. Below the others watched, their faces upturned. Charles stood rigid, arms crossed tightly. Constance hovered at his elbow, eyes darting uneasily between Hale, Lydia, and the shadowy corridor above. Felicity clung to Eleanor's arm, whispering rapid prayers or reassurances. It was hard to tell which. The bishop observed with solemn stillness, hands folded, his expression inscrutable. Hale reached the study door and rested his hand upon the brass lock. Dust had gathered along the edges, untouched for a year. "Lionel believed this room held meaning," he murmured, "and Gregory hinted at looking here if anything happened to him." "Do you think Lionel spoke to Gregory before he died?" Lydia asked. "Or someone who knew Gregory's fears," Hale replied. He inserted the key into the lock. "Either possibility is troubling." A soft click echoed through the corridor as the mechanism disengaged. Hale hesitated before pushing the door fully open. The study greeted them with the faint scent of old paper and extinguished pipe smoke, as though Gregory had stepped out only moments earlier rather than a year ago. The room was impeccably tidy, every book aligned, every sheet of paper stacked in perfect order. A heavy desk dominated the far wall, its surface bare save for a writing blotter and an empty inkstand. Lydia stepped inside, her eyes scanning every detail. "It feels untouched, preserved." "Yes," Hale said, "too perfectly." He crossed to the desk and began opening drawers carefully. The first contained only writing implements. The second held blank paper. The third was empty. Lydia examined the bookshelf. No ledgers, no correspondence. Not even a journal. Lionel said Gregory told him to look here. But for what? Hale opened the final drawer. Empty. He frowned. Gregory was meticulous. If he kept secrets, he kept them well. Lydia's attention shifted to the fireplace at the room's side. Ash lay cold within it, grey, undisturbed except for a small mound that seemed strangely out of place. As she leaned closer, she squinted at what remained within the mound, a scrap of charred paper, not fully consumed. "Hale," Lydia said quietly, "there is something here." He joined her and examined the fragment. Though mostly burned, one inked line remained legible. "The truth must be spoken, even if it destroys us." Lydia's breath caught. Gregory wrote that. "Or someone imitating his hand," Hale replied. He retrieved the piece with care. Whatever was burned here, it was recent enough for the ash pattern to remain distinct. Someone has been in this room. Lydia felt a cold ripple down her spine. Then the lock was not as untouched as it appeared. Hale stood, lantern raised. Someone used this room to destroy evidence. Perhaps moments before we arrived downstairs to find Lionel. Before Lydia could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the distinct sound of hurried footsteps retreating. Hale moved instantly toward the door. "Stay behind me." Lydia followed as he stepped into the corridor, lantern sweeping across the walls. They reached the landing just in time to see a shadow disappear down the far staircase, the one leading not to the drawing room but toward the service corridors near the kitchens. Hale descended swiftly, Lydia just behind him. "They know we found something," she said breathlessly. "They're running." "Not running," Hale corrected, voice sharp. "Redirecting. Trying to reach something, or someone, before we do." They reached the foot of the staircase, only to hear another sound, the distant slam of a door deeper within the manor. The kitchens, perhaps, or the servants' passage connecting to the wine cellar. Hale paused, listening. Then he lowered the lantern. "Whoever it is, they know this house well." "Could it be a servant?" Lydia whispered. "Possible. But servants know better than to wander without purpose during an investigation. No, this was someone familiar with both the study and the cabinet. Someone desperate." Lydia felt a tremor in her chest. "Lionel said the man believed the letters belonged to him." Hale nodded grimly. "Which means our suspect has just revealed himself, at least in motive." Before they could pursue further, raised voices erupted from the drawing room, not panicked, but urgent. Eleanor's voice, unmistakable, called out, "Inspector Hale, come quickly!" Hale exchanged a brief look with Lydia before they hurried back toward the main hall. When they entered the drawing room, they found the guests gathered tightly near the hearth, surrounding something or someone. Lionel was awake again, his eyes wide with terror, his hand gripping the doctor's sleeve with desperate strength. "He remembers something," Felicity whispered. Lionel's voice was barely a rasp, but every word carried with dreadful clarity as he pointed a quivering finger toward one of the assembled guests. "I saw him," Lionel choked out. "I saw him in Gregory's study, the night he died." Lionel's trembling hand hovered in the air, pointing, but the moment stretched unbearably as his strength faltered and his arm wavered. The guests stared at him with wide, horrified eyes, each silently pleading not to be the one he accused. Inspector Hale stepped closer, his voice low but commanding. "Lionel, focus. Who did you see in Gregory's study the night he died?" Lionel swallowed with difficulty, his breath thin, his eyes darting across the faces before him. At last, his gaze settled, piercing, terrified, on Bishop Carmichael. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The bishop's usually serene expression tightened, though he did not step back or avert his eyes. Instead, he folded his hands calmly, as though preparing to address a congregation rather than to defend himself. "My son," he said gently, "you are unwell. Whatever visions torment you, they are born of fever and injury." Lionel shook his head weakly. "No, I saw you. You were arguing with him, heatedly. He said you knew about the letters." His voice cracked, barely audible. "You threatened him." Eleanor's face blanched. "Bishop, is this true?" The bishop's calm facade flickered, revealing a hint of strain. "Eleanor, you must not credit the accusations of a man suffering confusion. I visited Gregory earlier that evening, yes, but there was no argument. He confided in me. He was troubled, burdened. I offered counsel, nothing more." Inspector Hale's gaze narrowed. Why was this never mentioned during the investigation of his death? "Because it seemed irrelevant," Carmichael replied, though the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Gregory was many things, Inspector, but deceitful he was not. I believed his worries purely spiritual." Lydia stepped forward, her voice soft but unyielding. "What worries, Bishop?" Carmichael hesitated, then sighed heavily. He felt betrayed by someone close to him. He would not name the person. He asked me to pray for discernment, for strength, that was all. Charles scoffed. "How convenient that you remember this now." Constance shot him a warning glance, but Hale lifted a hand. "Let him speak." The bishop's shoulders sagged. Gregory confided that he feared a grave deception, something that could destroy those he loved if revealed. He spoke vaguely of documents, yes, but I did not know their nature. I left the study before he retired. Lionel's eyes flashed with renewed urgency. "You're lying. I heard shouting. Gregory told you he planned to reveal everything. And you said—" His voice collapsed into a ragged whisper. "That the truth would ruin us all." Felicity pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Eleanor leaned back as though struck. The bishop closed his eyes, inhaling deeply as if steadying his resolve. "I will not deny we had words. Gregory was afraid. He believed exposing certain matters would spare no one, not even Eleanor. I urged him to seek patience, to wait until after the festivities. I feared he was making rash decisions." Inspector Hale stepped closer. "What matters?" "I did not know," Carmichael cried, his composure cracking at last. "He did not tell me specifics, only that someone had wronged him gravely and that he had proof he meant to share on Christmas Eve." The room fell deathly still. Snow battered the windows like insistent fists, as though the storm too demanded the truth. Hale folded his arms. "If you believed Gregory intended to expose someone, did you fear the consequences?" The bishop stiffened. "Inspector, I cared only for Eleanor's well-being. If Gregory intended to drag her into scandal, I wished to dissuade him, to give him time to reconsider." Lydia's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "You weren't trying to stop him for your sake, but for hers." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Mine?" The bishop bowed his head. "Yes. Gregory feared that if he revealed what he had learned, your reputation would suffer, your peace shattered. He spoke of financial ruin, of betrayals that would reflect upon the entire household. Charles paled visibly. Constance gripped his arm. Hale watched them both closely. "But I swear to you," Carmichael continued, "I did not harm him. I left him alive, deep in conflict but intent on making his decision by morning." Lionel shook his head faintly. "I saw you leave, but someone else came after you." His eyelids fluttered. Someone Gregory trusted less. Before Hale could question him further, the lantern flame flickered violently as a sudden gust slipped through the cracks. A sharp bang echoed from somewhere deep within the house, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming. Everyone froze. Hale turned immediately toward the corridor. "No one should be moving through the manor." Avery stepped forward, distressed. "All the servants are in their quarters, sir. They've not left since you ordered them to remain." "Then someone else is wandering where they shouldn't," Lydia murmured. Hale addressed the group with steely clarity. "Stay together, no exceptions. Whoever Lionel saw in the study that night, and whoever fled earlier when we reached the study, is still attempting to conceal something." Charles's breathing quickened. "Inspector, surely you don't think—" "I think," Hale said coldly, "that Gregory Cavendish was silenced by someone who feared the truth he uncovered, and that person is desperate enough to strike again tonight." The storm outside roared louder, rattling the glass as if promising more chaos to come. Hale turned toward the corridor, lantern raised. Lydia stepped beside him without hesitation. Someone behind them swallowed hard. Someone else trembled. And somewhere else in Grey Lawn Manor, footsteps, soft, swift, purposeful, retreated deeper into the shadows as though the truth itself were attempting to flee. Inspector Hale moved swiftly toward the corridor, the lantern light stretching ahead in unsteady arcs as the storm outside pounded the walls with renewed fury. Lydia kept close beside him, her breath quickening not from fear alone but from the growing certainty that the night's revelations were converging toward a single, unavoidable truth. The muffled slam of the distant door still echoed faintly through the manor's halls, like a final warning from the house itself. Behind them, the guests huddled together in a tense cluster. Eleanor leaned heavily against Felicity for support, though her eyes followed Hale with a resolve that belied her trembling frame. Charles and Constance stayed close, whispering anxiously. Bishop Carmichael stood apart, his hands clasped, his expression solemn yet shadowed by unease. Lionel, once more unconscious, lay motionless under the doctor's care. Hale paused at the main corridor. "Whoever moved through the house knows precisely where to go," he murmured. "We must assume they intend to destroy whatever remains of Gregory's hidden evidence." Lydia's mind raced. If Gregory feared financial ruin, betrayal, and danger to Eleanor, then whatever lies hidden must implicate more than one person, or implicate someone in a way that endangers all. Hale nodded, and that someone is frightened enough to act impulsively now. They followed the corridor in silence, their footsteps muffled by thick rugs and the distant roar of the wind. The lantern's flame flickered, throwing eerie distortions across the portraits lining the walls. Stern ancestral faces that seemed to watch them pass with silent judgment. At the end of the hall, a faint light glimmered beneath a door. Hale motioned silently for Lydia to stay behind him. He approached, listening. No movement came from within. Slowly, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was one of the smaller parlors, rarely used except for storage during large gatherings. A single lamp sat on a side table, casting a dim glow. Papers lay scattered across the floor, and a desk drawer hung open, its contents upturned. Hale bent to inspect the papers. They were blank sheets, envelopes, and unused stationery. Nothing damning. Lydia scanned the room, noting the disarray. Someone searched here, but for what? "Not sure," Hale murmured, "but I doubt they found it." A sudden sound, soft, almost imperceptible, came from the passage behind them. Lydia stiffened and turned. Hale extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging the room into semi-darkness lit only by the distant lamp. Footsteps moved lightly down the hall, then paused. Someone was waiting. Hale stepped silently toward the doorway, his hand poised to seize whoever approached. Lydia held her breath. A shadow shifted across the wall, elongated, hesitant, before stepping fully into view. It was Constance Ventham. She froze at the sight of Hale, her breath catching, her eyes widening in terror. "Inspector, I heard a noise and came to find Charles isn't with me. Her words stumbled and fell apart under Hale's sharp gaze. "Mrs. Ventham, searching the manor alone is precisely what I forbade. Why are you here?" Constance wrung her hands, trembling. "I was frightened. Charles left the drawing room. He said he needed air. I didn't want him wandering alone in this storm, with all this madness happening." "And yet," Hale said quietly, "you did exactly the same." Constance's breathing quickened. "I had to find him. He's been so strained, so unstable." Lydia stepped closer. "Unstable? In what way?" Constance hesitated, glancing away. He hasn't been himself since Gregory died. Charles feared Gregory would expose him, but he swore it was all a misunderstanding. He said Gregory embellished things." Hale's voice cut through her trembling confession. "Mrs. Ventham, is your husband truly looking for air, or is he searching for something else? Some final piece of evidence?" Constance shook her head, but tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know anymore." Just then, another sound echoed, this time from deeper within the manor, a heavy thud, followed by the unmistakable crack of splintering wood. Hale's eyes snapped toward the sound. That came from the wine cellar door. Someone is forcing it open. "Charles!" Constance gasped and would have run had Hale not caught her arm. "You will stay here," he ordered firmly. "Lydia, with me." They moved quickly toward the cellar staircase, Constance's sobs fading behind them. The storm's howling receded as they descended into the cold stone corridors beneath the house. The air thickened with damp earth and aged oak barrels. Lanterns flickered along the walls, casting trembling shadows. At the far end of the cellar hallway, the door to a small storage room hung crooked on its hinges, recently forced. Hale approached, every sense alert. Inside, the room was small, dusty, and crowded with old crates. On the floor lay remnants of a wooden box, smashed open. Papers, yellowed, brittle, were strewn across the stone tiles, some shredded, others intact. Lydia knelt, picking up a fragment. It bore Gregory's handwriting. "These were hidden here," she whispered. "He separated them from the letters in the cabinet." Hale scanned the floor. Someone knew they existed. Someone desperate to destroy them. A rustle came from behind a stack of crates. Hale raised the lantern high. "Show yourself." A figure rose slowly from the shadows. It was Charles Ventham. His face was pale, his eyes wild, and in his trembling hands he held the remains of a torn envelope. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Charles gasped. "Gregory, he cornered me. He threatened everything. I only meant to stop him from ruining me, not—" He broke off, staring in horror at Hale and Lydia, as though only now realizing the trap had closed around him. Hale stepped forward. "Mr. Ventham, did you confront Gregory the night he died?" Charles backed away, stumbling against the crates. His breath came in frantic bursts. I asked him to wait, to reconsider. He refused. He said he'd expose me, destroy me." I only grabbed his arm. He fell back, hit his head. Lydia's eyes widened. "It was an accident." Charles' voice cracked, collapsing under the weight of guilt. "Yes. And no. I panicked. I let them believe it was his heart." Hale's expression hardened. "And Lionel?" Charles shook violently. "He found the papers. He knew I couldn't let him—" But before he could finish, a scream echoed from upstairs, Constance's voice shrill and terrified. Lydia and Hale exchanged a single look. The danger, it seemed, was far from over. The scream tore through the manor with such piercing terror that Hale and Lydia bolted for the stairs without another word. Charles stumbled after them, but Hale seized his arm, forcing him to stay behind. "You will not take another step," he ordered, voice like iron. Charles collapsed against the cellar wall, too shaken to resist. Lydia reached the upper floor first, her breath sharp as she looked frantically around the drawing-room entry. Constance stood trembling near the hearth, pointing toward the corridor that led to the front hall. Someone went that way," she gasped. "A shadow rushed past. I thought, Charles." "It was not Charles," Lydia said firmly. "He is in the cellar." Inspector Hale arrived seconds later. "Stay with the others," he instructed Constance. "Do not move." He strode toward the hallway, Lydia keeping pace. A cold draft swept through the corridor, rustling the garlands along the walls. The front door stood ajar, snow blowing inward in swirling, frantic gusts. Hale pulled it shut forcefully, bolting it. "No one left," he muttered, "which means they're hiding here." A faint shuffle echoed from the stairwell leading to the second floor. Hale tilted the lantern upward. "Upstairs," he whispered. "Someone is desperate enough now to silence any loose ends." The two ascended cautiously. The lantern cast long, quivering patterns across the wallpaper, the storm outside throbbing like a distant drum. At the landing, a figure stood partially concealed in the shadows, rigid, waiting. "Come into the light," Hale commanded. Slowly, the bishop stepped forward. Lydia's breath caught. But Hale did not lower the lantern. "Bishop Carmichael," Lydia said carefully. "Why are you here?" The bishop exhaled shakily. "I came to find you. I remembered something I had forgotten in my distress. Gregory. He gave me a sealed envelope weeks before his death. He said I must give it to Eleanor only after Christmas Eve this year. I put it away for safekeeping, and only tonight did I realize what it might contain." "Where is it?" Hale asked sharply. "In my room," the bishop replied, gesturing toward the corridor. "Untouched." Hale studied him, then nodded. "Show us." They followed him down the hall. The bishop entered his modest guest room, crossed to a small writing desk, and removed a sealed envelope from a drawer. Its paper was yellowed slightly with age, and Gregory's bold script covered the front, "To be delivered to my wife on the Christmas Eve following my death." Lydia felt a chill. He knew something would happen to him. Hale opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter, trembling slightly in Hale's hand as he unfolded it. He read silently, expression tightening, then passed it to Lydia. She read, "My dearest Eleanor, if this reaches you, the truth has already come to light. I fear one among us seeks my ruin, perhaps my life. I've gathered the documents needed to expose the betrayal. Should I not survive to present them myself, I trust Inspector Hale, or any worthy investigator, to follow the trail. But know this above all, you are blameless. What I do to protect you, even if the storm breaks over us both. Your devoted." Gregory. Lydia lowered the letter, throat tight. Hale turned to the bishop. "You kept this hidden." "I obeyed Gregory's instructions," Carmichael said earnestly. "I was not to open it, nor reveal it until tonight. I did not realize how grave the situation had become." Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Avery, breathless. "Inspector, the young Mr. Pierce is awake again. He insists he remembers everything." They hurried back down the stairs, returning to the drawing room where Lionel now sat upright, pale but lucid, supported by cushions. The others gathered around, tense and silent. "Lionel," Hale said, kneeling beside him, "speak clearly. We found Charles in the cellar with destroyed papers, but you said someone else came after the bishop that night. Someone Gregory trusted less. Who? Lionel turned his eyes across the room. His gaze settled on a single person. Eleanor. A shocked murmur rippled through the guests. Eleanor reeled backward as though struck. No, Lionel whispered. Not Eleanor, but someone who used her key. Slowly, horribly, everyone's eyes shifted to the only other person who could have taken it without Eleanor noticing. Avery, the butler, stood frozen, his composure unraveling. Inspector Hale rose slowly. Avery, you had access to the study. You tended Gregory daily. You controlled the household keys, and you would have known where he hid documents. Avery's face contorted, grief and fury twisting together. He was going to expose us all, he said, voice cracking. Everything he discovered would have destroyed Eleanor, the Venthams, the bishop, the entire estate. I begged him to reconsider. You confronted him, Hale said evenly. He refused, and you killed him. Avery shook violently. I didn't mean to. He collapsed after we argued. I thought if the world believed his heart failed, Eleanor would be spared scandal. I acted for her. Everything I did to preserve her peace. Eleanor's voice broke. Avery, how could you decide such a thing? Avery fell to his knees, trembling. Forgive me, my lady. I wished only to protect what he cherished. Inspector Hale stepped forward. And Lionel? He discovered what Gregory hid, Avery whispered. I only wished to prevent further harm. Hale placed a firm hand on his shoulder. The harm is done. Avery sagged, defeated. Outside, the storm began to ease at last, its fury spent. Later, as constables escorted Avery and Charles Ventham away, Lydia stood beside Hale near the hearth. The ruined secrets, the shattered lies, and the bitter truths hung heavy in the air, but so did a quiet sense of closure. Do you think Gregory found peace? Lydia asked softly. Hale nodded. He trusted that the truth would surface when it must, and tonight it did. Eleanor approached, eyes sorrowful yet grateful. Thank you, Inspector. You have restored my husband's honor. Hale bowed his head with quiet dignity. It was Gregory's own clarity that solved the case. I merely followed his light. As dawn approached, pale winter sunlight filtered through the frost-laced windows, casting gentle illumination across Greylawn Manor. Christmas Day had come, somber yet honest, and the truth, at last, stood unburied.